What happened in sport, business, military, police, and now the legal fraternity? Are transformation policies replacing merits? Some are blaming the quota system for failing to be elected into the new Legal Practice Council. The statutory body is set to replace the Law Society and Bar Council. Many black lawyers say the legal fraternity is largely untransformed. Others argue that only the best should be appointed to the oversight body. But does transformation equate to a lowering of standards? We talked to lawyers Lutendo Sigogo, Anthea Platt, Chantal Gladwin-Wood about the controversy surrounding the new legal body. And Mark Oppenheimer joins us from Cape Town. Very warm welcome to all three of you. And you, Mark, in Cape Town. You are against this, Mark. Why?
Yes, so I wrote an article for Politics Web. My concern is the following. So our Constitution is founded on a number of values. Firstly, democracy. Secondly, non-racialism. And thirdly, non-sexism. So the concern with this election is that it creates rigid racial quotas and rigid sex quotas. And what we found, actually, is that now that the results are in, some of what I said in my article has come to be, which is that black people have been excluded on the basis that they did not meet the quotas. So, for example, if you look at the election results for the attorneys, where they adopted for 4 black women, 3 black men, 2 white men, and 1 white woman, when you look at the results, you see that the white man actually came last, and that there were 3 black men ahead of him and 1 white woman. So what we have in the new South Africa is a situation where someone has been disenfranchised on the grounds that they're black, and that seems unconscionable to me. So, to my mind, what you do when you run a fair election is that you have 1 man, 1 vote, and you ensure that the electorate is represented accordingly. The idea that people ought to be represented by particular racial groups or by particular sex groups is also something that seems repugnant to me. So when we think of Nelson Mandela as our president, we think of him as president for all South Africans in 1994, not just for black men. The same goes for Barack Obama or whoever is in a leadership position. I'm sure that Lutendo, who's the president of the Black Lawyers Association, represents all of his members, including those that are women, even though he himself is not a woman.
All right, Lutendo, do you want to respond to that? Obviously, you don't have to respond to the not woman thing. We get that. But is this disenfranchising, do you think?
It is not, I must say. Mark is missing the point. That the purpose of designing this elections process the way it was done was mainly to protect the interest of black people and women in particular, because we were moving from the position where in the law societies, black people and women were minority in terms of regulatory bodies, and in some instances, if we look at the era before coming into space of the Black Lawyers Association, NADEL and AFT, you are going to find that maybe only 1 woman was in that space. Now, with these elections, if we revert to 1 man, 1 vote, and also taking into account the statistics in our country in terms of lawyers, you will find that white lawyers in South Africa constitute 60% and black 40%, and male lawyers constitute 63% and women constitute 37%. So if we leave it for 1 man, 1 vote, there's a possibility and a danger that women and black people will not fairly be represented in the statutory law, LPC.
And is this the right way to address that problem?
I think it is. We must accept that the legal profession was governed by voluntary associations, and that's been running for over 100 years. And with their progression, if I just quote what is at the Johannesburg Society of Advocates, there's 1,181 members, of which 191 are women that are white, of which 17 are senior counsel, and 182 are black women, and 10 are senior counsel. So if we're leaving it up to voluntary associations, the pace is so slow that we will never see a fair representation with regards to demographics of the country.
Is that because of race, allegiance, or what's the problem there?
Well, it started over 100 years ago, and it was it was only white male. And right now, we're still predominantly white male. So if we leave it to just the white males, we can see that 24 years into democracy, 15% are black women. And if you're saying that is transformation, then I will say that's not transformation. So you can't rely on a voluntary organization to fast-track transformation. You need legislation in order to do so.
Is legislation the way to do it?
I think in this particular instance, we need to just take a step back and understand the context a little bit better. So the Legal Practice Act, which is now the empowering piece of legislation that creates the Legal Practice Council, which is the body we're talking about, it definitely, there's a strict requirement that the composition of the Legal Practice Council, which is going to regulate both attorneys and advocates, be broadly demographic. And that is very important because we need to make sure the transformation actually does happen. The question here is not, was it legislation necessarily that caused the consternation? It's more the manner in which the National Forum chose to go about the election. So it was the National Forum that decided that the way they were going to do the election was to set the quotas that we are speaking of, where instead of having a situation where the people with the highest votes overall out of the country would get onto that body, which may very well be a danger, as Lutendo and Anthea have mentioned. Instead of following that system, they chose to say, we will have 3 positions for black males and 1 for a white female, and so on and so forth. And the candidates that get the highest votes in that category...
But why would you follow a system that has clearly failed, in your view, in the past?
I think each attorney, every person who's admitted as an attorney is an advocate of the court, is bound to uphold the law and the spirit of the Constitution. And there are some people out there who are anti-transformative, absolutely, I will grant you that. But I don't think that you can say that the majority of attorneys and advocates in South Africa who may be white according to the statistics are anti-transformative and would necessarily stand up and only vote for white people, because that is the assumption upon which this is based. In fact, if you look at the numbers of the votes, there were only 6,000 odd votes out of 25,000 attorneys and, was that attorneys and advocates or just attorneys? Attorneys and advocates in South Africa, there were only 6,000 votes. And if you look at the number of votes received by the candidates, you will see that the black members by far received many more votes than the white members. So that actually speaks to the contrary happening. It wasn't white people and white attorneys standing up and block voting for white men. That's not what happened.
Can I ask you to pause there for a moment? We've got a caller on the line from Cape Town. Ismail, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for calling. Thank you for accepting my call, and also welcome to your guest. I just want to say that democracy is defined as the government of the people by themselves. And it expresses an absolute impossibility and cannot even have a mere de facto existence in our time anymore. Because democracy, in the sense that, the way we are doing it is a total farce. It cannot be a government for all. It cannot be, because it's only the one section that wins. He takes the crumbs, he takes the bread, and the rest gets the crumbs. So democracy will never work in South Africa. South Africa needs a government of national unity where everybody can come together, because we've got so many different cultures, so many different problems, and the only way we can sort these problems out is we all come together and sort it out. But it will never happen under the democracy that we are practicing, where it is the government for one and the government for all.
Thanks, Ismail. Mark, shouldn't everybody come together to sort this out? Shouldn't you be stepping back here and saying, okay, it's your time, go ahead, it's fair enough?
Well, let me say a couple of things. Firstly, Lutendo, in an article that he wrote in response to mine, states that what I really want is for the council to be filled with white men. That's not at all my view. What I care about is a fair process. If every single person that is elected onto that council is a black woman or a black man, fantastic. And as we see when we look at the numbers, that black men and women have done incredibly well in those votes. I'll also say that those that have been voted in tend to be exceptionally excellent people. The concern, of course, is that when you run an election, you do so with democratic principles and with the Constitution in mind. The Constitutional Court has looked at this question about rigid quotas and has held that, in other contexts, they're invalid. So the idea is, the problem with the quota is that it's an indignity to two sets of people. So firstly, those that you disenfranchise, which in this particular election, we know that 3 black men and 1 white woman were removed on the grounds of their race and sex. That's an indignity to them. Furthermore, there's the indignity to those that are placed in who would not have won otherwise. In other words, they are never viewed as legitimate candidates. So I do agree that what you want is a fair process where all of us together, South Africans, with all of our wonderful, rich cultural backgrounds and different ways of thinking about problems, can come together and solve the problems that face our profession and face the country. And you want to ensure that there are no unfair barriers at all. In other words, if you have a discriminatory system that excludes people because of their race, that's unacceptable. If it excludes them because of their sex, that's unacceptable.
Okay.
So you want to allow everyone to have a fair chance at democracy and a fair chance at representation.
Lucinda?
Thank you. Mark is missing a point. This thing is not done arbitrarily. There's a law, and it moves from the Constitution. And if we check, this does not go against the spirit of Section 9, subsection 2 of the Constitution, which allows system measures to be put in place where those who were previously disadvantaged can now be advantaged and also be protected. And that can be done through the legislation. And the Legal Practice Act, under Section 7 of that particular act, it puts in place a system where people who were previously disadvantaged can now be put in this legal practice council. That is what it is being done. What Mark is saying, as if he's protecting the woman and the black people who have been overtaken by this one white man, is just a smoke screen. We do not agree, because we knew.
And what about Chantal's comments about this is possibly done on, racist assumptions? And isn't this feeding the racial narrative that the country needs to get rid of?
Well, if you look at the governance of the legal profession now, before the LPA, it was based mainly on white males. And with AFT coming into existence, it's only in the last, just over 10 years that we were able to get co-governance on the GCV, as well as some bar councils, not even all bar councils, show transformation as a 50-50 split. So I think that if you look at history, we won't see transformation happening very fast. It has to be legislated. And it's a narrative we have to push, especially in the legal industry, where it has been so predominantly white and male.
We've got another caller, Rita, on the line from Johannesburg. Go ahead, Rita.
Hi, Jane. I'd like to ask your... Hi, Jane. I'd like to ask your two pro-quota lady and gentleman.
Okay.
Do they not feel highly embarrassed at the fact that they need extra, protection or extra special treatment, when in fact if it were a majority vote, it would be majority black anyway? I mean, I can't understand that. I think it's an insult to their own, to be honest.
All right, thank you for that, Rita. Would you like to?
No, I'm definitely not embarrassed at all. I think the white society has been protected by legislation for so long that they don't even feel embarrassed by the fact that it's for so long that they have been protected. And they've worked and lived in a society where that protection has been granted to them. And now for 24 years, the protection is now moving to the previously disadvantaged, and now we have to be embarrassed. I don't feel embarrassed at all.
I fully agree with Anthea that there's nothing to be embarrassed of here, because
time for change.
It's time for change, and people must embrace this change. They must live with it, and they believe they are protecting. They are talking about Constitution. No, they are protecting their vested interest. And now we must all know that when things changed in 1994, there's no going back. Things will change forever, and those who were previously disadvantaged will now be advantaged, and that is what we talk about, equity.
Now, I know Mark wants to appeal this, but if it does go ahead, what sort of impact would it have, excuse me, on the broader base of the country, on the legal fraternity? How will it play out there?
One of the comments I'd like to make is that I don't think, and I'm speaking for Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, that Mark has anything against anyone who's on the council. As you said, everybody that has been elected is excellent. You're very happy that they're there. I think the challenge or the question is more about the manner in which the election took place and whether it's necessary and whether it's actually a step backwards in terms of transforming, in terms of our constitution. What will the impact be on the broader base of attorneys in South Africa? I don't think that there will be a significant impact, because I think that regardless of whether there had been a quota system in place or not, excellent people would have been elected and they will serve the country and the profession well. Again, it's about the principle and what we subscribe to as lawyers in upholding the Constitution.
It shows you how difficult change is and how long we have to go and to agree. But thank you all for talking to us about this. Lutendo Sigogo, Anthea Platt, Chantal Gladwin-Wood and Mark Oppenheimer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight. News is next.